Today we're going to be covering lesson 1-6, Algebra, Variables, and Expressions. And by the end of this lesson, you're going to be able to use substitution to evaluate an expression. And our key vocabulary for today is variable, algebra, algebraic expression, and coefficient. Here's the first thing that we're going to look at today. This is known as an algebraic expression. Here we have a variable. This is a variable because we don't know what this number is at this point in time. Later on we'll learn how to solve for variables, but right now we don't know what the value of n is. And so when you have an unknown value, we can put a letter there representing that. This is known as an algebraic expression, as I mentioned earlier, because an algebraic expression has to have a variable, an operation, and a number, and that's what we have here. We have the variable n, we have the operation addition, and we have the number 2. Just as a little hint about variables, there are a few variable letters that might be a little confusing to use for variables. For example, the letter O. Is that an O or is that a 0? We don't know. So O might not be the best variable for you to use. The letter T could be a little confusing because is that a T or is that a plus sign? We don't know. In order to take care of that confusion, I personally write my T's with a little foot so that I can clearly see the difference between a T and a plus sign. The last letter that might not be the best variable to always use is the letter Z, because sometimes a Z and a 2, if you're writing really quickly, can start to look a little similar. So that's why sometimes you'll see people write a Z with a little cross here in the center to say that that's a Z and this is a 2. And you've probably heard the word algebra used quite frequently, and that's just a type of math that involves expressions and variables that have variables in them, and that's called algebra. So this right here is known as algebra because it has a variable in it. Here's our first example that we're going to do today. It says evaluate. Remember, evaluate means to find the value of an expression. So we're going to evaluate n plus 3 if n equals 4. So for this one example, they're telling us anywhere that we see n, that's going to be equal to 4. So that means anywhere we see the letter n, we can substitute or replace it with the number 4. So in order to go about solving this, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to substitute the number 4 in for right here where we see n. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to rewrite this, and I'm going to put a 4 where I see the letter n. So that means I'm going to write 4 plus 3. And then I'm just going to do the math. 4 plus 3 is equal to 7. There, we did our first one. So remember, only in this example does it mean that when we see n, it's equal to 4. Any other example that we see later on, it's not always going to be that the letter n is equal to 4. It all depends on the example that they give us and what they tell us the variables are equal to. There's another thing that we need to make sure that we understand. What does this mean, 6D, mean? Well, in algebra, instead of using a multiplication symbol, an x like this, we can also just put the variable and the number right next to each other like we have here, and this means 6 times d, or 6 multiplied by d. You could also have something like this, 9st, and that means 9 times s times t. And right now we don't know what s, t, and d are equal to, but maybe the example would tell you what those 3 variables are equal to, or maybe later on in the series of videos we'll actually be solving for what s, t, and d would mean. So when we see a number right next to a variable and there's no operation sign in between, that means that we are multiplying. And this number in front of the variable here is known as the coefficient. So this number right here in front of the s and the t, the 9 is known as the coefficient. Just like here, the 6 is the coefficient of the d. So here's our example that we're going to do with this. This one says evaluate 8w minus 2v if w equals 5 and v equals 3. So just like in our last example, anywhere I see W, that means that I can put in the number 5. And anywhere I see the letter V, that means I can put in the number 3. So I'm going to rewrite this now with these new numbers in it. So that means we're going to have 8 times, and I'm going to use parentheses to represent my multiplication here, minus 2, and I'm going to represent multiplication a different way this time. I could use a dot times 3, because we don't want to use the X sign anymore for multiplication, because that could be a variable. So we don't want to use that anymore. It's a good idea to use a dot, a parenthesis, something other than the X sign for multiplication. So now remember, our order of operations says that we're going to do any parentheses. We don't have any parentheses here. Remember, this is just multiplication here. So then I'm going to ask myself, do I have any exponents? No, I don't have any exponents here. The next one is multiplication and division from left to right. So I'm going to move from the left to the right and see if I run into any multiplication. And here I do right here. 8 times 5. 8 times 5 is 40. I'm going to do that one thing and bring everything else down that I haven't done yet. Now I'm going to go back. Any parentheses? No. Any exponents? No. Any multiplication or division? Well, let me check. I'm going to move from the left to the right to see if I run into any. And right here, I have multiplication. 2 times 3. So I'm going to do that. 2 times 3 is 6. So I'm going to write that down and then bring everything else down that I haven't used yet. Now that I have only one operation left to do, and 40 minus 6. 40 minus 6 is 34. So there, I've evaluated this expression, 8w minus 2v, if w equals 5 and v equals 3. I substituted those values into the expression. I followed the order of operations. I did one thing at a time, and I brought everything else down, and I got to my answer, 34. Let's give one last one of these a try. Here it says, evaluate 4y squared plus 2 if y equals 3. So that means anywhere I see y, you can put in the number 3. So I'm going to rewrite this. 4 times 3 squared plus 2. So the order of operations says, are there any parentheses here? Nope, there aren't any. Are there any exponents? Yes, right here we have an exponent. So that's 3 squared, or that's 3 times itself. So 3 times 3. Remember, that's not 3 times 2. So this is 3 times 3, which is 9. I'm going to do that first, and I'm going to bring everything else down. So now we're going to go back. Any parentheses? No. Exponents? No. Multiplication and division from left to right. Let me start on the left and go to the right. Well, I run into some multiplication right here. 4 times 9. 4 times 9 is 36. So I'm going to write that down, and then I'm going to bring down everything else that I haven't done yet, plus 2. Now we only have one thing left to do. 36 plus 2 is 38. And there's our answer. We evaluated 4y squared plus 2 if y equals 3. So the key things for this lesson are that when you see the value of the variable, you substitute that into the expression, and then you follow the order of operations in order to get your answer.